Hello and welcome to MBS Academy's episodes of Real Lives. Today we're talking to Faye, yoga teacher. Hi Faye, how are you?
Oh, I'm really well, Jackie, and really thrilled to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Tell me a little bit first about the yoga, because it is a special type of yoga, isn't it?
Yes, basically I teach a quite slow, I don't like the word gentle, so a slow but intensely powerful form of yoga that's based on the teachings of a lady called Vanda Scaravelli. So often I'd say I'm a Scaravelli yoga teacher.
Yeah, it's quite a mouthful.
Yeah.
But actually that's not what we're here to talk about today, is it? You've kindly offered to come on and talk about your experiences of adopting a child.
Yes, that's right. We adopted our daughter 15 years ago. And I feel that it's a story, that might just help anybody who's thinking of or going through that process in their life. That's my hope.
Excellent. So when did the story start? Why did you decide to take the adoption route?
So basically, I guess it starts back when I met my husband. So that's over 20 years ago now. I'd been working in the film business. I'd started in London and then moved to Spain. I was in Spain for 10 years working on films there. And then the lady that I was working with in Spain came to Monaco to produce a film here. And that's when I met Jose, who had a 7-year-old son. I'd had trouble with my previous partner. So I knew that there were issues there. But anyway, I met Jose, fell in love, moved here to the south of France, and we more or less immediately went into IVF. So we did about 4 or 5 rounds of IVF, which were pretty horrendous. Actually, more horrendous when I look back on them. When you're in that cycle, you don't kind of realise what a toll it's having on your mental health. Anyway, it kind of finished with me having a little bit of a mental breakdown. I remember I was at the Cannes Film Festival, actually. It was in about 2000 about 2000. And I just couldn't, I had, this was a woman who'd been used to having 10 phones all ringing at the same time. And suddenly I was on my mobile and the landline rang and I just completely freaked out. And I thought, right, this is too stressful. It's obviously having a toll. And so we took what I thought was it was a major decision, but I thought it was the beginning. We took the decision to stop the IVF and to look at adoption.
Right.
And I remember thinking, well, now we've made that decision, it's just going to be plain sailing from here. Within 9 months, I'll have a baby.
Yes.
No, not at all. Luckily, I didn't know. If somebody had told me then that it would take 4 years for our dream to come true, and obviously sometimes those dreams don't come true, but I don't think I would have embarked, because by that time I was already 40. That's right, in 2000 I was 40. And anyway, so we started the procedure, and
you started the procedure within France?
Yes, absolutely, in France. So my husband is French. I was living in France. I actually started the procedure. We weren't married when we started. And so I started the procedure as a single woman, because they didn't count the fact that even if you were officially living together, your partner couldn't appear on the forms. I'm sure this is one of the things I kind of need to say. I'm sure things have changed. So the actual paperwork procedure that we went through, I'm not sure that that's going to be hugely helpful to anybody, because I bet it's all changed. But back in the day, yes, you had to do that either as a married person or as a single person. So I started filling out all the forms, and then I just thought, this is so weird. You know, it's Jose and I adopting this baby, and it just didn't feel right for the paperwork to be in my name. Call me old-fashioned.
Oh, no, not at all. And, you know, as we all know, France is very keen on its paperwork, isn't it? So, no, I can totally understand. Because it is you embark together, isn't it? Not.
It is, absolutely. So because of that, Jose very sweetly asked me to marry him.
It's good you said yes.
Yeah. I did say yes. And so we got married. So I wouldn't say that we got married in order to adopt, but it did make the procedure just much more. It did make it easier, but it also brought more sense and love to the whole thing, which I think is hugely important when you're embarking on having a child in any situation, whether that's biologically or through adoption or through surrogacy, whatever. Love has to be there.
Absolutely. I mean, it's a big, big commitment. And so, you know, you're expressing that commitment with the marriage to begin with, aren't you?
That's exactly how it.
Doing it as a couple rather than, say, you on your own. So it makes total sense.
Yeah, that's exactly how it felt. And suddenly, so then once we were married, there are a lot more countries that were kind of, because at that point, we couldn't really go through an organisation. I have a feeling that maybe all adoptions these days are through organisations, but the organisations weren't going to accept us because we were both older. I was 40, he was 41. We'd both been married before. And certain countries asked that you be married for 5 years. So there were a lot of restrictions. But we eventually, we looked at lots of different countries. The first country we looked at was Cambodia, because a dear friend of ours was married at that time to a princess in Cambodia, one of the king's grandchildren. So she would have been able to help us hugely once we were in Cambodia. But of course, the important thing was the French authorities. Everything had to be. And as we were looking at Cambodia, France closed the possibility of adopting from that country. So that was kind of our first blow, one of many to come. It really is an emotional roller coaster. So
takes time as well, doesn't it? And you sort of, because you get your hopes up, you go and have a look around, it takes time.
Yeah, it takes time, it takes money, because each time you have to create a dossier, and the dossier is why I haven't asked for my French nationality yet, because I've got so many nightmare memories of that bureaucracy, paperwork. Yes. But I'm on that now. I've got a language test next week, so that's all.
Good luck with that.
Thank you.
Go ahead next week. I suppose next week. Yeah, you'll be all right.
Yeah, I checked in with them yesterday, and yes, my appointment is on Thursday, I think, and the doors will be open. Yeah. So anyway, eventually through talking to people, and I eventually met with a lady who had just adopted from Guatemala. And I went to meet her and her Guatemalan baby. And Guatemala made huge sense to us because my husband is Spanish. Our language of love, if you like, is Spanish. I'd lived in Spain for 10 years, so I'm fluent in that language as well. And so we started the procedure. We got in touch with a lawyer because each country works in a different way, which again, you kind of go through all of the different countries' requirements, and the ones that needed you to have been married for 5 years, they were out the window. There were some of them that needed you to have a minimum age difference of 10 years between you and the baby. That wasn't really what I'd been dreaming of. And there were some that, just asked for so many difficult bits of paper, it felt undoable. Some asked you to go and live in the country for 3 months, which before you adopted, which in our case was impossible. So anyway, Guatemala seemed to be the one. So we got in touch with the lawyer, and she had a system whereby you'd be put on a waiting list. And I think we were 20 on the waiting list at that point. And then as and when these, poor women in Guatemala realized that they couldn't they'd fallen pregnant, there's no birth control, whatever, they would contact the lawyer and say, you know, which was the case of our daughter, in actual fact. You know, our daughter was the 7th child in this very loving family. And they, you know, none of the children were at school, none of the children. Food is not such a huge problem in Guatemala. There's, you know, there is a lot of fruit and vegetables, but poverty and living conditions are very problematic. Mm. So they had decided that they couldn't possibly give the life that they would have dreamed of giving to this 7th child. And so they contact the lawyer, and then once you're at the top of the waiting list, the next baby that's born is for you. So we were, you know, life carried on. I went off to work on a film in Madrid, and suddenly we got a letter from the lawyer in Guatemala saying that France had closed all adoptions from that country as well.
Oh gosh.
It's
hit the floor.
Absolutely hit the floor. I remember it so well. I was in Madrid. I was away from José, was actually on a meditative walk in the desert in Tunisia. I couldn't get hold of him, and it was horrendous. So you kind of swallow that. That was in the March, I think. And we picked ourselves up, and we had another tip from somebody. I think that one was in Brazil. And so that sounded very promising. We were in touch with an amazing lawyer there who was just so wonderful. And we did the whole dossier. And then it just kept getting pushed back and pushed back and pushed back. Meanwhile, the authorities in Paris had suddenly said, listen, anybody who had the promise of a child when we closed adoptions can still apply. So we were still sort of fighting a little bit against that, saying that we hadn't had the promise of a child, but that we were 4th on the waiting list and and that we had been offered a child, but the lawyer had withdrawn that because the child had serious physical disabilities, which wouldn't necessarily have bothered us, but it bothered the lawyer. So we were in touch with, it was called the Mission d'Adoption Internationale in Paris. We were in touch with them all the way through this time that we were also looking at Brazil. And it's a long story, that bit, but basically in the June, the MAI in Paris said, okay, we give you permission to adopt. Now,
I get quite a moment for you. You must have, you know,
it was a moment
in case they take it away again, but also.
Well, there was no actual child in question. It was just, yes, we give you permission to adopt from Guatemala. Now, by this time, we were very much thinking that Brazil was going to happen. So then we're kind of, oh my God. So we contacted the lawyer in Guatemala and we told her what they'd said. Brazil was pushed back and back and back. I was by this time on another film in Spain. And the lawyer, it must have been, because Lilia was born on the 15th of September, it must have been on the 20th of September, got in touch with us and said, I have this baby girl. She's in perfect health. Her parents are married and they're a loving couple. So we immediately phoned the MAI, this place in Paris. They said, yes, absolutely, go ahead. But we needed one last piece of paper. So, that was all right. So I got I got the piece of paper from the lawyer. I phoned Paris and I said, I've got this piece of paper. I just want to know whether I should send it to you or to this other place. And the woman said, actually, we've made a mistake.
What?
Actually, you weren't on the list. my hierarchy have looked at this and we're not giving you permission. Well,
I think, yes. I mean, I'm speechless listening to that. You must have been on the phone going, what? I mean, either that or you'd explode, I think.
I was hysterical. I was crying. I was shaking. I was hysterical. But at the same time, I was a production coordinator. I was very organized in my head. And I started saying to this woman through this hysteria, but we wrote on this day and we said this and you replied this. And she, I think this really played in our favor as well. She was very new to that service. And I think anybody that works in a place like that must be so emotionally stressed because you're dealing with desperate people. And I think they get burned out and, yes, not so, they just can't be so emotionally involved. Whereas this woman was very new to it. And so she listened to me and she said, listen, what I need you to do is write all of that down and send it to me. And I said, but what am I supposed to do in the meantime? How long is this going to take? Because by this time we'd had a photograph of Lilia. We'd had a photograph of her, as a newborn baby. Right. And so I did come home and with my husband, we wrote, as I say, a very organized letter, a very calm letter. We sent it off. We thought we would have to wait for 2 weeks. And 2 days later, she rang and said yes.
Well, that's good. I mean, and they should have, shouldn't they, really? I mean, to go through all that and say that to you, it must have just...
I mean, as I say, I was probably one of thousands of people in the same situation. But so that was by now we're kind of at the end of September. And I go into this very strange, surreal place of calm because lots of things could still go wrong. So I'm not jumping up and down in the air. The whole procedure is going to take 6 to 8 months. The biological parents could change their minds. Guatemala could break out in civil war. Anything could happen. So I go off on yet another film to Luxembourg. And I've got the photo of Lilia at my side and José back here in France. He's in touch with the lawyer in Guatemala. And that's where speaking Spanish was such a boost and a bonus to the whole thing, because the lawyer became attached to us because we could speak her language in part. And so I'm working away on the film. And on about the 18th of December, just before Christmas, I go into my spam and there's a message from the lawyer on the 12th of December saying the paperwork has gone through.
In your spam?
In my spam. So I'm hysterical again. And I'm in the car park in Luxembourg outside the production office trying to get a signal, phoning the lawyer and saying, oh my God, I've only just seen your message. I can't believe it. You haven't. And she said, this is not a bag of sweets. I've not given her to anybody else. And I said, but I just can't believe that we hadn't seen your message. So I phoned José and we put all of the wheels into motion. And basically she said, get on a flight. So I'm in Luxembourg on a film. I have a day to hand over to somebody else. Luckily, the lady that I was working for was amazing. She'd been through this story with me for months on end. And she actually had the film pay for our flights to Guatemala, kind of as an overtime payment. But that
Excellent. Well, yeah. Yes, those little gestures really do make a difference, don't they, when you're in these situations?
They really did.
Yeah.
So I ran around like a headless chicken, got on a plane back here to France. I think I arrived here on the 23rd of December. On the 24th, I had to go to the production office in France to, again, tidy up all the files. that must have been on the 23rd. The 24th, we went shopping. That was Christmas Eve, looking for bottles and clothes for a 3-month-old baby. I didn't have a clue. I remember.
I was just wondering if you sort of over time had actually got things together in anticipation or not, because
I would have done if that. I was thinking that as I say, the procedure would take 6 to 8 months. But because Guatemala had closed for international adoptions, it meant that whereas your file might sit in an office for those 6 to 8 months, ours went through in 3 months.
Right. Yeah.
So, and for Lilia, how amazing! Of course, there's always, I think, I've not seen any signs of it yet, but I presume there's always going to be the trauma of separation between the biological mother and the child. But she was only 3 months old. So she'd not had the traumatic experience of an orphanage or any of that.
Yes.
Which I think was hugely important to her. And of course, for us, selfishly, we had a 3-month-old baby, which in my wildest dreams, I wouldn't have imagined.
Yeah, amazing.
So,
but Christmas as well. So, and you're madly going around buying things.
Yeah. So the 20, as I say, the 24th, we're there. Yeah, so I would have had all of that prepared. I would have come home from Luxembourg, started doing the nursery and everything, worked out which bottles you should get for a 6-month-old baby, which clothes, had none of that time. So the 24th, we're there in Carrefour, panicking, buy some things. 25th is Christmas Day. Yeah. I managed to make a few phone calls, and we managed to more or less clear out the bedroom, make it right for a baby. And on Boxing Day, we flew. And that, funnily enough, well, it's not funny at all, it was the day of the tsunami, which we were totally ignorant of. On the 26th, we were on a plane, we flew via Frankfurt, got to Guatemala City at 11 o'clock at night, went to a hotel that the lawyer had booked for us, didn't sleep a wink, got up in the morning, waiting in reception for the lawyer to arrive.
Yes.
We see a lady come in with a little, she must have been about 8, little girl, and a baby dressed in pink. But the lawyer wasn't there, so Jose and I are kind of stealing little looks at this woman. Of course, you don't want to go up to her because it might be her daughter. No idea.
Yes.
And about half an hour late, the lawyer arrived, and Jose had actually met her in France. That's a different story, but just coincidentally. And so I went up and introduced myself and gave her a hug, and I kind of pointed at the baby. She went, yes.
Oh my gosh.
And so that was the foster mother. Lilia she'd been with a foster family from the minute she left the hospital for the first 3 months of her life, which again, how wonderful, because Cecilia was the name of the foster mum, and she was lovely, and Sophia was the little girl, and she showed me how if I did this on Lilia's forehead, that would put her to sleep. And we had asked them, as soon as we knew that we'd been given permission to adopt Lilia, we'd asked them to call her Lilia, because her birth mother had given her another name, which is now Lilia's second and third name. But so, again, she was a newborn baby, but for me it was important that she was called by her
Yes,
name.
It was a question I was going to ask you, is if you chose the name or if the name was changed.
Yes, no, we chose the name Lilia way before any of this had happened. I had read it in a book by Alejandro Jodorowsky. I don't know if you've ever come across him. He's an amazing man. And it's quite difficult, isn't it, living in a foreign country? It's quite difficult finding a name that works for us in all 3 languages, French, English, and Spanish.
Yes.
Because I love the name Grace, but Grace, I'm not so, I don't like so much. Gracia, I'm not mad on either. So it had taken a while, and I had read this name Lilia, and that had kind of stuck with me. So yes, on Lilia's Guatemalan birth certificate, which she has 2 other names. And then on her French birth certificate, which is what happens once the adoption has gone through, she has 3 names, the name that we've given her, and then the 2 names that her birth mother or birth parents gave her.
That's really interesting that she's actually got her original birth certificate, because many people that are adopted don't have access to. I know it's all changed recently. Well, recently, probably over the last 10 years, I suppose. But yeah, there's back if you were adopted back 60s, 70s, you had no access to.
No, this to us was so important. I mean, it was luck and destiny that things turned out this way. But I remember when we were having one of our meetings, you have to go through a whole series of meetings with social workers and psychologists when you're going through the adoption procedure. And they ask, what's your idea of adoption? And I said, well, for me, it's a bit of a fantasy, but I dream of, a child who is born to loving parents, not as a result of rape or incest or anything horrific. And that you have, and that you have information on those parents, and those parents just their desire for their child is that they have a better life. And that's exactly what happened. But I've met many people, like you say, and one person in particular who their daughter, there was just 2 weeks difference between her and Lilia. They were born on opposite sides of the world, but this little girl was abandoned in the street.
Right.
So she will never, in France, there was the whole scandal of people being born and you didn't have to declare the name, but there was at least some trace, which, as you say, the authorities then opened it up so that it was easier for people to eventually follow that paper trail. But this little girl, she'll never, ever, ever have any idea.
Yeah.
And I think that's just unthinkable.
Yeah, and so they must leave so many questions unanswered, for sure.
Yeah. I mean, on the one hand, she's got an amazing life with parents that love her dearly, but for some children, that's enough. At the moment, that's our case. There's no desire there we've always been totally and utterly open since she was 3 months old. We've never hidden anything. There's no way that you could. I have a lovely story, actually, of when Lilia was little, and she was about 5, I suppose, and we were talking to a friend's little boy who was only about 3, and I was talking about yoga, and I was saying that I don't really, I've never trained in prenatal yoga, and that it's not something that I feel drawn to because I've never been pregnant myself. And this little boy looked at me and looked at Lilia and said, but what about Lilia? And Lilia kind of took her arm and mine and went, duh. A completely different colour to her. But I love that, because to a 3-year-old, colour means absolutely nothing.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely nothing. Yeah. So do you actually have any contact now with the bird?
No. We could, so we would know how to do that. But at the moment, there's no interest from my daughter's part. So, I've always kind of thought, well, if ever she asks, then of course, and we've always made that, very clear to her as well, if ever she needs to go back to Guatemala and do, but at the moment, not interested at all.
Yeah.
Much more interested in going to Japan.
Oh, that's good. Yes.
Yeah.
Can I come too? Japan.
Not at the moment.
No, that's true. That's true. It's an excellent story, and it's obviously got a very happy ending.
Yes, and as always in these cases, whenever I tell that happy story, I'm very aware that not everyone has a happy ending, in the same way as when I was going through IVF, people would send me articles with happy endings and say, don't give up hope, don't give up. And I think I said to you when we were chatting the other day, sometimes the best thing you can do in life is give up hope, not with a feeling of resignation, I think that's the problem. When we think about giving up hope, we think that we're resigning. But actually what it is it's accepting. And as soon as you start to accept and stop fighting against things, then other things, there's an opening there for other things to arrive. And in our case, it was an amazing opening, but for other people, it might be something else, you know.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I do fully agree with, you know, the letting go does open up doors and opportunities when you stop fighting against things. It's not only, you know, in your situation, but I think generally in life, if you don't fight, then things will come to you.
Absolutely. I mean, Eckhart Tolle, The Power of Now, if anyone watching this hasn't read that book yet, that's a good place to start. No matter what you're going through, even, and I say this with huge compassion and feeling, but even if you're grieving, it's the fighting against it. It's the saying, it's so unfair, it's not right, that's going to hurt you. You can't change anything with those thoughts. You can't change. I've been saying this such a lot recently, I guess, because of the situation we're in. You can't change what happens to you, but you can change the way that you react to it.
Absolutely. It's been great talking to you, and thank you so much for doing this. If you could give the listeners and the people watching this one piece of information or advice about your experiences going through adoption, what would that be?
Funnily enough,
from this?
Yeah, funnily enough, it might not be what you expect, but if you're struggling at the moment with becoming pregnant, or if you're going through IVF, honestly, what I wish I'd done was to put the adoption procedure into place straight away. I wasn't anywhere near ready to think about adopting when I was going through IVF, but it takes an awfully long time to adopt. And normally, if you're already going through IVF, that probably means you're at a certain age because you've spent quite a few years trying naturally. That would be my advice, actually, very practical.
Very practical advice, yeah. Yes, it does take time, and you're right.
And you can always, you know, if you're then lucky enough, I think I'm the luckiest mother in the world, but if you do fall pregnant naturally, then you can cancel the adoption procedure. I'm not saying once there's a baby there, but the whole thing takes an awfully long time.
And obviously, from your experiences, there are things that are out of your control that affect that situation or that paperwork or that process anyway.
Constantly.
So,
constantly out of control.
Yeah. Thank you so much. If people want to contact you, how do they do that? Maybe they want to talk to you about your experiences, or perhaps if they're looking for a bit of support, or maybe even want to know more about your yoga practice.
Yes, absolutely. I'm more than happy to talk and share with anyone at all. I guess that the easiest way is with my email, which is quite easy. It's Faye, Faye, at bbox, bbox.fr. So,
okay, and that email address will be in the links below. I'd just like to say thank you so much for sharing your story. It's inspirational, and I'm so pleased that it's got a happy ending.
Yes,
anybody that's listening and watching these videos and podcasts, if you want to enjoy more of these films, then please share, like, and subscribe. And don't forget to hit the little bell to get notifications of when the next one's coming up. Thank you so much, Faye, and I look forward to sitting down and having a cup of coffee with you once
me
lockdown
too.
And situation with COVID-19 is over. Thank you.
Me too. I can't wait. Thank you.